All right, we're going to get going. Hi, everyone, and welcome to Harnessing Clean Energy Funds for Affordable, Equitable Housing. This is a free 45-minute webinar about how communities can access federal Inflation Reduction Act, IRA funds, and use them to address the intertwined crises of housing and climate. My name is Claudia Aiken. I'm Director of New Research Partnerships here at the Housing Solutions Lab. I'm joined today by my colleague, Aisha Balagan, Special Projects Associate, who will be facilitating the Q&A portion at the end. And this webinar is a collaboration with the Climate and Community Project. So I'm so delighted to welcome Ruthy Gourevitch, who will be presenting highlights from her recent report, Decarbonization Without Displacement, with a focus today on how localities can think about implementing IRA in a way that promotes equity, renter stability, and sustainability. And I'm also thrilled to welcome Sarah Ralich, Senior Energy and Construction Manager for Action Housing, which is Pittsburgh's largest nonprofit developer, but also a provider of critical services like home repair, housing navigation, and rental assistance. And we'll be speaking with Sarah about Action Housing's approach to harnessing IRA funds for housing equity. Next slide, please. So I'll start things off with just a very brief introduction to the Housing Solutions Lab. Then we'll give Ruthy the floor. And after that, we'll have a conversation with Sarah about her firsthand experience on this topic. And finally, we will have about 10 or 15 minutes for your questions. So please feel free to submit those via the Q&A function at any time during the session. And we'll get to as many of them as we can. So if you're not familiar with the Housing Solutions Lab, we are based at the NYU Furman Center, and our mission is to help small and mid-sized cities plan, launch, and evaluate housing policies with the goal of advancing racial equity, health, and well-being. This webinar is part of a broader effort at the lab to build out our resources at the intersection of housing and climate. If you visit our website, you can read a primer about the 3 major pathways between housing and climate, and also access mini briefs and case studies on topics like equitable disaster recovery, home electrification, and retrofits. And if you have ideas about what resources would be useful for your jurisdiction, please let us know. You can email us at any time or reach out using the Ask the Lab tool on our website. So thank you so much for joining us today. And just noting quickly that this webinar will be recorded, and we'll share that recording as well as the slides on our website. And now, without further ado, I'm going to pass it to Ruthy.
Thanks so much, Claudia. It's so great to be with you all today. My name is Ruthy Gourevitch, and I am the Housing Policy Manager at Climate and Community Project. We're a national climate and economic policy think tank that has been thinking a lot about issues around equitable implementation of federal green investments as it relates to housing, schools, transportation, and other issues. So today I'll be talking about how we can support housing justice for renters specifically in the context of the Inflation Reduction Act. Next slide. So as probably everybody on this call knows firsthand, the climate crisis is hitting people right at their front doors. Buildings, energy use from buildings is making the climate crisis worse. It represents 30% of US carbon emissions nationally. So there's a real need to be decarbonizing, removing fossil fuels reliance out of our homes. In addition, energy burdens are disproportionately impacting Black, Latino, and low-income households. People are paying more in utilities than they've ever seen before, forced to make impossible decisions between their utility bill, their rent, their medication each month. Mold, lead, and other hazardous toxins are abundant in our aging housing stock across the country. And climate change, whether that's increasing heat, that's exacerbating issues of mold or flooding, it's all kind of compounding these effects. And then lastly, disasters are increasing housing precarity and threatening displacement. We actually see No-fault evictions increase in the wake of disasters, and rents go up for low-income households in the wake of disasters as well. Next slide. So renters are especially vulnerable to climate injustice and also kind of an underlooked, underexplored population when it comes to supporting people through climate crises. So for renters, their housing quality is largely in the hands of their landlords, right? They have pretty minimal agency over what kind of improvements they can do to their own unit, and they're legally bound by lease documents that put most of that agency in the hands of the landlords. Affordable rental housing is few and far between, and it's disproportionately located on the front lines of the climate crisis. And renters are actually more likely to be energy burdened than homeowners, which really translates to renters being more likely to live in units that are energy inefficient, whether that's broken windows, cracks in the foundation, those kinds of issues that are really making it harder to stay warm in the winter and stay cool in the summer. But even with all of this, renters are often an afterthought in climate policy. And that's not necessarily, putting fault in any specific place, but really, I think it's more of an indication of the way that federal dollars are flowing to localities and to homeowners directly, make it challenging to leverage those funds for renters, which is a bit of what I'll talk about next. So the Inflation Reduction Act was passed a couple of summers ago now. While we saw, some of the most historic kind of post-pandemic rent increases, condition issues, and hot heat waves that we've seen in the history of the U.S. Next slide. But despite, the Inflation Reduction Act being passed right at that key moment in U.S. housing history, there's really not a strong focus on housing justice in this legislation. There's pretty few renter-centered programs. I'll talk about some of the housing-oriented programs today, but as you'll see, you really have to kind of mix and match and be creative to figure out how to leverage these resources to support housing justice for renters. The one other thing I'll just say, kind of big picture about the Inflation Reduction Act, as some of you may have been following, the Biden administration had been trying to pass significant housing investments for affordable housing programs, rental assistance. But as the legislation got negotiated and changed, and I was actually working in Congress at the time, and we saw a shrinking of the housing investments during that time. And so while you may have heard about housing money in the news, really the final package was explicitly focused on clean energy investments as they relate to homes. Next slide. So what is in the IRA for tenants? And also let's talk a little bit about what's not in the IRA for tenants. The biggest piece of funding in the Inflation Reduction Act for homes are the home inheritor rebates. These are about $9 billion to electrify homes and increase energy efficiency from two different programs, both of which are going to be administered largely at the state level. You can see these little icons show what are types of upgrades that are eligible through this program. We're looking at things like induction stoves, electric system upgrades, new ventilation, heat pumps. So both things that allow for increase of renewable energy in our homes, as well as things that create more energy efficient homes. Households that make up to 150% of AMI can receive up to $14,000 in rebate funding, but this is, you have to have the upfront capital, and then the rebate is essentially a synonym for getting a reimbursement. All housing types are eligible, but importantly, as you see here, it is not eligible. You cannot use this funding for a lot of the underlying repairs that we all know are needed in the rental stock, right? So for example, you can put a solar panel on a mold infested building using IRA dollars, but that tenant will still experience, the detriments of living amongst mold in their apartment, and you can't use the IRA funding for those kind of underlying, more holistic home repairs that I know are, quite costly and quite urgent to get done. Next slide. So just really quickly, the way that the rebate funding flows, states and tribes are basically applying right now. Many have already applied for this funding to the U.S. Department of Energy. They have to do so by January of next year. States are then, once they've applied, setting up their own programs and infrastructure to award funds directly to property owners and in some case renters for energy efficiency upgrades. We are seeing some kind of like collaboration and role of cities as well in administering funds, but really like the legislation gives the power to the states to be able to directly provide the assistance and the rebate to the landlord or the property owner. I'll go ahead to the next slide. States' allocations are determined already by the Federal Department of Energy. So you can, we can share this after, but there's a resource where you can look up the table to see how much money your state will be getting in rebate dollars. There's also an emphasis on ensuring that 40% of funds go to low-income households, and that at least 10% of funds go to low-income multifamily households. So there you can see some kind of emphasis on needing to support renters through these rebate funds. Next slide. There's also some tenant protections attached to these rebates, which is pretty unprecedented. They're very minimal and they don't come with funds for enforcement or like know your rights type education. So it's kind of TBD to what extent they end up having an impact. But essentially, this is a recognition from the federal government that low-income renters who live in improved units could see rent hikes or displacement unless they have some sort of tenant protection, which we'll talk about more in a minute. So there's a bunch of kind of like risks and concerns in thinking about how to equitably decarbonize that are really front of mind when looking at the IRA funds. The first is what we call the split incentive. So it's this idea that, landlords are not necessarily they're not living in the units that would be upgraded with the funds, and they often aren't even paying the utility bills for those units. So they have less of an incentive to go through the arduous work of applying for funding, putting up the upfront capital and doing those repairs. And that is one of the main things is just like, will landlords, take up this funding to decarbonize and make energy efficient their own homes? There's also concerns around if tenants ask for these repairs of their landlords, which is kind of the road to seeing change in your unit, they could be met with retaliation, and most places don't have any form of good cause eviction protection. And so at the end of a lease, the landlord could decide, I don't like that you were asking me to do things, you have to move out now. Lots of tenants also don't know who their landlords are because of increasingly opaque ownership structures in our rental market. And then also this problem of needing like upfront costs or needing upfront capital in order to do the upgrade in the first place before getting reimbursed down the line. Next slide. Also, in a country with very little form of rent regulation, and probably most of the cities that you're all tuning in from today have no rent control and no eviction protections, it means that landlords can really leverage these upgrades to, increase the prices that they're charging, which is a rational thing to do as a landlord who is, in the business of rental housing. But from a tenant's perspective, that looks like rent hikes, and sometimes that even looks like displacement. And in that case, are these investments really helping the people that we want to be helped through these larger goals of equitable decarbonization? And then I have a couple others, but I'll go ahead to the next slide. So that was kind of like the rebates, the good, and maybe a little bit of the bad and ugly of how they're flowing. I just wanted to name, there's also other programs in the IRA that can be used for housing. I'm not gonna go into the nitty gritty of each of these. There's incredible resources that a lot of climate groups have put together that I'm happy to share with anyone after this call that really walk you through what each is. I'll just say, from the perspective of a city practitioner, the direct pay tax credits allow cities to receive tax-free cash payments directly from the IRS for clean energy projects that have to meet certain fossil fuel reduction requirements. And so that can include things like if you have a public housing stock or a neighborhood with a lot of public assets and you want to try and do neighborhood scale decarbonization, there's lots of innovative things happening there. There's also the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund, which several nonprofit national organizations have been awarded a lot of funding to specifically think about how to help the housing sector decarbonize. And it's a bit up in the air exactly what that will look like, but really exciting to see where it will go. And then all the way at the end of the slide, you see community change grants and environmental block grants, these are competitive grants that cities and CBOs can apply for together to further environmental justice projects. And we're seeing a focus on weatherization projects in housing, public housing, retrofit projects, those kinds of things come up. So that's another kind of potential source to look into if you're interested. Next slide. So ahead to the next slide, just to close out, a couple of recommendations based on the research that we've done so far. I think one of the key things that I'm excited to be thinking with practitioners in different parts of the country about are braiding IRA clean energy funding and incentives with these kind of underlying whole home repair programs, which I know our next speaker will also be able to speak to, and really thinking about, now that there is money flowing for clean energy upgrades piece of the equation, how do we pair that with, funding for the more underlying repair needs that are essential for being able to live safely in our changing climate. Another big thing to be thinking about is how are we conditioning these IRA fundings on tenant safeguards? How are we ensuring that, embedded in program design are things like tenant protections, as well as know your rights trainings and enforcements to make sure tenants know what protections do exist for them in the event that landlords are seeking to, leverage dollars to flip properties. Also really encourage people to be collaborating with environmental and climate agencies to just generally think about how to get IRA implementation to the rental housing sector, which in itself, as we've talked about, is a challenge. And then taking advantage of some of these other programs beyond the rebates, like direct pay and community change grants, which are getting less attention, but I think are really exciting tools to be advancing housing and climate goals. My last slide I'll close on is just really, I think, like what our research digging into Inflation Reduction Act and as it relates to housing is showing is a need to be mobilizing across the housing justice and climate and environmental justice realms for a broader tenants climate agenda. Things like fighting for, resources for whole home repairs so that we're not only doing the decarbonization part of the equation without the essential kind of like, general day-to-day material condition improvements that tenants have been wanting to see and need to see for their own health for decades and decades. Things like anti-rent gouging policies and funding conditions to ensure that landlords aren't acting in bad faith in some cases to leverage government resources to increase profits beyond a fair and reasonable amount. Eviction protections, climate action plans that center renters. There's a big kind of momentum around city level climate action plans, and kind of a cursory review of a whole tranche of those shows that very few of them actually even talk about renters. And so really figuring out how do we take like a nuanced view of who is most vulnerable in our city and how are we ensuring that our climate plans are speaking to them. And then also thinking beyond current forms of ownership to get around the split incentive issues that we see, and what would it look like to, further the decommodification or social ownership of our homes to bring back some version of public agency over the housing stock, whether that's through a public developer like they're exploring in Montgomery County and Rhode Island, or bigger visions around like community land trusts and decommodified housing. There's a lot of ideas out there that I would love to talk to anyone more about. But I will stop there for now. Thank you all so much for your time and excited to hear what you are thinking about.
Well, thank you so much, Ruthy. And folks, if you have questions for Ruthy, please put them in the Q&A. We will have time for them at the end. So I just encourage you, whether it's a clarifying question or you'd like Ruthy to speak more to a particular topic, please put those in the Q&A. And I'm really excited to talk to Sarah. I feel like this conversation is going to be so relevant given what Ruthy just covered. But if you could start by just giving us an overview of what Action Housing is and does, and also your role there, I think that'd be great.
Sure. Yeah. So Action Housing is a nonprofit owner and developer of affordable multifamily housing in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. We also run the weatherization program in our counties. We're the largest weatherization provider in the state of Pennsylvania. And we run programs like the Whole Home Repair Program and Youth Age Out of Foster Care Program and rental assistance, housing stabilization, those types of things. So I am the energy and construction manager. So I work on a real estate development team, mostly focusing on two things. So focusing on multifamily new construction, renovation, and I work with our asset management team to do planned renovations, decarbonization, energy efficiency measures with our existing portfolio. And I also work with our whole home repair team to kind of integrate IRA funding and other measures that are out there into our programming on all of our levels. So it's a little
That's
bit
so
about.
cool. Yeah. And if you could fill us in a little bit more about that last bit about how you all are thinking about IRA and what sorts of opportunities you're pursuing.
Yeah, so as far as single family programming is concerned, we through our whole home repair program, our team did a great job building a database and a intake platform that we are hoping to use to implement other programs here in Allegheny County. That meaning IRA programs and funding sources coming from our local governments, whole home repair, that type of thing, kind of creating a central hub in Allegheny County so homeowners can go to one place to access all of the available funds. We're hoping to use that platform for that. Obviously, there's a lot of unknowns about IRA funding and things coming in. We've had some decisions that have been made, some not, and we're working with our state and local governments on trying to pull that all together. And with our portfolio and the multifamily piece, we are obviously working to prepare our portfolio, doing our benchmarking and our portfolio analysis to target properties that could receive some of these funds to do some decarbonization, energy efficiency upgrades. And also we are part of a kind of larger statewide capacity building program with some of our state partners to build capacity for other affordable multifamily owners to do the same thing. So once these funds hit the streets, they're kind of ready to jump.
Yeah, that's very cool. And neat that you're on both sides of the equation, as a multifamily developer and owner, and then also a service provider. You mentioned that there is a lot of uncertainty around the IRA, and I wonder if you can talk a little bit more about what navigating that uncertainty has been like.
Yeah, so there's a lot of money, but there's not a lot of money, right? There's a historic amount of money, but there's not enough to go around for everyone to do all of their projects. And I think that everyone across the country has been dealing with that. And we've been part of a lot of applications for funds. We've been a part of a Solar for All application that has been successful. We've been a part of a CPRG application that has not been successful. We were part of a few community change grant applications that we haven't gotten any responses yet. So I think that the funding availability has been, just like everybody else, we're dealing with the same things, not knowing how much funding we're getting, if we're getting any at all, what types of scope are we going to be able to do. We want to build from our whole home repair program because we know that a lot of, not all, but a lot of, low-income households, they need repairs before they could take part in any decarbonization scopes. We're hoping to build on that with anything that we can get, but that's just kind of the uncertainty that I think the whole country is dealing with right now.
Totally. Yeah. And that's exactly, I think, the braiding of funds that Ruthy was talking about. But yeah, complicated since we don't know what the exact guidelines will be. Yeah. All right. Well, another thing that Ruthy mentioned is the split incentive. And so I know you've applied for IRA funds to upgrade one of your apartment buildings. Can you tell us a little bit more about how you chose that building, what upgrades you're hoping to implement, and also what roles split incentives might play?
Sure. Yeah. So we, after I did my portfolio analysis for our buildings and identified our highest energy users per square foot, and also interviewed all of our maintenance and property management staff and what buildings had the most deferred maintenance issues, you know, system failure, imminent system failures, that type of thing. I kind of was able to identify one of our buildings as a prime candidate for a large scale, you know, renovation. So it's a senior high rise, 103 units, and it was built in 1974, and it hasn't had any major, you know, improvements since. So it was the second largest energy user by square foot in our portfolio. So it was a good building to start to think about. So I applied for funding through HUD, through the GRRP program, to do a full scale energy retrofit on it. All new systems, all, you know, new facade, new windows, solar everywhere. So we're still waiting to hear back, of course, for that funding, but we're really excited about it. But the interesting, not why I chose this project, but it just happens to be one of two buildings in our whole portfolio that is it's a master meter. So the tenants do not pay any utilities. So split incentive does not really apply to that. I mean, the tenants will be getting a better building at the end, but as far as what they're going to pay, it's going to remain the same. So their rent is set by HUD, and so they don't have any utilities. So, but we do consider that, and a lot of our HUD buildings, they have a utility allowance that's calculated based on the type of systems and the historic bills and things like that. So as far as the split incentive is concerned, we would just work to get those adjusted if the utilities, you know, were to go down for the tenant, but they would end up paying the same amount in rent every month, if that makes sense. But which I know is very different than a naturally occurring affordable housing building. That's you know, there aren't utility allowances and a max rent for tenants. So
Gotcha. Yeah, that's helpful. All right, I'm gonna ask you a couple more questions. I am seeing some great ones in the chat, but I'll use my privileges here. So, can you just talk about which IRA program you're most excited about?
yeah, so I guess I am most excited about the multifamily programs that the state is going to be running. Because I feel like the affordable multifamily housing sector is often, let me say, left behind. You know, we've been able to do a few buildings with the weatherization program, but there's always some sort of barrier there. And the utility programs for energy efficiency, they're really geared towards single family. So I think I'm most excited about that. I know our state is still trying to figure out exactly how to implement that, and there are a lot of questions. But I think that we're going to be able to do some really, really cool things and get some money into these buildings that desperately need it. And also any of the single family programs that we're going to be able to pair with our whole homes program, I think is going to be really exciting. And yeah, so I'm looking forward to that as well.
Yeah. Yeah. And on that note, I know with the whole homes repair program, you've taken a really equity focused, data-driven approach. And can you tell us a little bit more about what that has looked like and how you might want to apply it, even with IRA funded programs going forward?
Yeah, so our approach for our whole homes database system was to do an intake form online where you could fill out your own intake form, or you could go to our housing stabilization center in person, or you could call one of our staff members and they could fill it out for you. So there's multiple different ways to do it. But at the end of the day, it goes into a randomization tool where you get assigned different weights based on different criteria. And a lot of that has to do with equity. It has to do with AMI, you know, child 5 years or younger in your home, childhood asthma, accessibility, census tract as well. We have identified 20-some census tracts that have been historically redlined within our region, and other equity measures that we're able to put more weight to your application. So it goes through our randomization tool. And the system then does the randomization and chooses the clients that get served. So everybody has a chance to get served, but you are assigned different weights. So humans don't have to rank them or choose between one or the other. It's a randomization tool. So we're hoping it's worked very well for our whole home repair program. We just get so many applications for such limited amount of funding. There was kind of no way that humans were going to choose, because everybody is obviously qualified for the program and should get served under it. So we're hoping to use that same tool for our IRA programs. But again, that has a lot to do with who is administering the program and what rules and regulations that they have to follow as far as who gets chosen. So that's little bit up in the air.
Right, absolutely. That's great though. And then finally, just what advice would you give to other communities that are interested in harnessing IRA?
I would say if you're not already talking to everybody, talk to everybody. So here in Pittsburgh, we've had a really tight-knit group, and we've had a lot of foundation support for kind of getting ready for the IRA. And all of our stakeholders have really just been talking and planning and going in on applications together and really kind of creating a united front. There's not a lot of money and we all have to share it. So I think that that's probably if you haven't already been doing that in your communities and even at the state level, we've been doing a lot of capacity building here in Western Pennsylvania to try to harness as much money for these programs for the clients that we're serving. So I think that's the first step.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Sarah. And I think now we're going to open it up. I'll pass the mic to Aisha to help us facilitate. I can't hear you, Aisha.
Classic. Here we go. Thanks, everybody, for sending in your questions. First, I'll give you two kind of clarification questions, Sarah. First is from James Cherrier. He asks, were you able to get the 30% tax credit in the form of a cash payout? Also, were you able to claim the 20% bonus credit offered in the IRA by doing a low-income project? And then I'll also kind of group that in with another clarification question from Amanda Wilson, who asks if you're planning on using IRA dollars on upgrades on buildings that are not master metered. And she'd just like to hear your reasoning either way.
Yeah, so yes and yes. So we're in the planning phases for most of our stuff, so we have not been able to apply for any of the tax credits yet, but we do intend to. We have put solar on one of our buildings so far, and we are in the midst of applying for the tax credits for that. So yes, we are, and we will. It's really complicated, and I'm not like a tax attorney or an accountant. But we work with a lot of really great people that are helping me with that, because that's one part that I haven't been able to wrap my mind around, because I don't do taxes, but we will be pursuing that. And yes, as far as our individually metered properties, we will be applying for IRA money to upgrade those, because a lot of the building systems are on the house meter, is how they were built. Like a lot of the heating and cooling is paid for by the house account, which is the owner account. And also, we are a nonprofit. We do care about our tenants, and so we do want to reduce the energy burden for all of our tenants. And if we can finance it, then that's great. If we can underwrite it, a lot of the loan products are still up in the air. And if we get rebates, and as long as the numbers work, I mean, we're kind of all in for that. So.
Great. Next, I'll give a question to Ruthy. This is from Rebecca Helzel. They ask, have you found a way to promote community housing land trusts with towns or cities to protect renters and perpetuity when rentals are energy upgraded?
Great question. I'm really excited to be, seeing the momentum for community land trusts across the country. I will say just one anecdote. We are seeing directly the benefit of having community land trusts, specifically so far on mobile home parks, as a way of being able to then do these clean energy upgrades without seeing some of the rent gouging that had been going on in mobile home parks across the Southwest and in California. So that's just one example. I think that community land trusts and cooperative models are absolutely essential for being able to equitably do some of these clean energy upgrades. And I've seen, I mean, I'm based here in New Haven, Connecticut, where there's a very active tenant union that is in conversation with the city, which just set up a land bank about how can a vision for a community land trust and the newly existing land bank, which has some resources but not a ton, kind of work together to think about taking properties that are in distress out of the hands of corporate landlords who have been negligent and into the hands of organized tenants directly. So that's just kind of one example of the way that these conversations are happening. I think like one of the things to think about in how cities can work with land trusts is one, thinking about what are the groups of organized tenants or community organizations that are already kind of, ears to the ground, thinking about tenants' rights in your community, and how do you kind of work hand in hand with them to bring this issue to reality. And then the second, how do you ensure that, or just the importance of ensuring that the CLT mission is really about permanent affordability and deep affordability, because what we're seeing is, we can't have it be that as we quest to decommodify housing, it's really only a market rate vision, right? The people who are most in need of that decommodified housing are people who are very vulnerable and very low income and on the front lines of the climate crisis. So those are kind of the two things I think that are helpful to think about.
Great, thank you so much. I'm also seeing a few questions in the chat from folks that are working with tribes or reservations. So I'll just pose the general questions to our panelists. So are any of you working with or familiar with grants that will support housing energy efficiency in tribes?
I can speak low, Sarah. Okay, cool.
Yeah, you can take it. I don't have any familiarity with that.
A bit, and feel free to follow up with me after. I'm happy to kind of direct you to people who will know more than I do on this. The programs that I spoke about, tribes are eligible to apply. Like, for example, the rebate programs, tribes can apply directly to the federal government and be standing up their own programs. So I'm not sure where different tribal communities are at in that process, but it is definitely an option. And then, beyond that, I'm happy to kind of connect you further to other people.
Great, thank you so much. I think looping back around to land trusts and in general decommodified housing, we did get a question from Nicole Card asking what can or should local government do to promote decommodified housing? She's really interested in that idea. And Claudia, I bet you could jump into with some of the findings of your research as well.
Yeah, I just love that we've woven this into this climate discussion. And I'll let Ruthy chime in as well, because I know she's been part of a big recent report looking at green social housing on a national scale. I will also say that here at the lab and the NYU Furman Center, we've been looking at emerging models of public development. And what we generally mean by that is public entities that have a significant stake in housing, whether it's mixed income or affordable. And that stake can take different forms, but it opens up a lot of opportunities, I think, to create long-lasting affordability, but also generate returns for the public entity that can be used for other public purposes. And so we've seen housing authorities engage in that. We've seen nonprofits that have been spun off by state and local governments to do development. It's taken a lot of different forms. Community land trusts are another form that we haven't explored as much. But it can, we're seeing super interesting models pop up, and we're really looking forward to releasing some research about that soon. But Ruthy, I'll let you chime in as well.
Yeah, I too am finding myself very interested in this idea. And I think I just put in the answer a couple of resources, and I want to just really double click on the grassroots reflections on social housing resource, because it kind of surveys across the country different ways, different types of momentum for decommodifying housing that I think kind of lend themselves to a lot of potential policy and programmatic solutions that cities can work towards. But I think that some of the big things that need to happen in order to realize a vision of decommodified housing is first supporting tenant organizing in a specific location, and thinking about pathways to social, from distressed housing to social ownership through things like enforced code enforcement, regulatory regimes, fees and fines, receivership, and then kind of like towards tenant opportunity to purchase. And then the third thing is kind of to Claudia's point, like setting up the public capacity to be able to finance, resource, and develop decommodified housing, which I've done a lot of research on this idea of like a social housing development authority as kind of one mechanism that cities, states, or the federal government could deploy to create new financing mechanisms to create deeply and permanently affordable decommodified housing.
Great. Thank you for those comprehensive answers. Maybe our last question, we'll see how much time we have after this. But Sarah, we have some folks that are interested from the nonprofit developer and nonprofit like whole home repair stance of how those programs can better support, or how IRA programs can better support homeowners specifically. So if there's more work that you can talk to specifically on that.
Yeah, so through the single family IRA programs, they're mostly exclusively going to, or planning to go to folks that own their homes based on our whole home repair program. So our repair program is for homeowners. So we're really trying to focus on keeping people in their homes, and a lot of that has to do with repair work and making the home more affordable from an energy burden perspective. So I think that's what we have been trying to focus on, in building that generational wealth, especially in communities that have been redlined or geographically underserved, those types of things. And that's why we've been trying to prioritize those homeowners through the whole home repair program, through any potential IRA programming.
All right, thank you so much. And maybe squeak in one last clarification question. We have, let's see, Richard Ross is asking for a nonprofit multifamily affordable housing developer, should we start with enterprise to access all the appropriate IRA funding programs? So maybe some general advice on how a nonprofit developer can access a general suite of IRA funding programs.
Yeah, so I would say that yes, enterprise is part of a GGRF recipient, so they are going to be a part of providing loan products for affordable multifamily housing owners to do decarbonization and energy efficiency upgrades. And also talk to your state energy office, whatever state that you are located in, because they are going to be, most states, I should say, not all, but most states are going to be implementing hopefully robust multifamily energy efficiency programs. So there's not like really one place to go, but I would say start with those two.
Well, thank you so much, Ruthy and Sarah. This has been wonderful to get to partner with you both on. I've learned a lot. I'm sure our audience has as well. I hope everyone will keep an eye on Climate and Community Project's website, as well as the lab's climate and housing page, where new resources will be going up, and stay in touch with us. Ruthy has really generously offered to follow up on a bunch of points, and we are also happy to do that. So please stay in touch. Thank you all so much and have a wonderful afternoon.